Hi, I'm Debbie Braun, President of the Aspen Chamber Resort Association, and you are watching this edition of Aspen Affairs, brought to you by the Aspen Chamber Resort Association. Hello, everyone. It's local election season. Super important time of the year. Local elections are in March. I just want to remind everybody, early voting starts February 14th, Valentine's Day, and then ballots are out on March 7th. So you got a job to do. You have got to figure out who is running for mayor and city council. You got to dive into their platforms. Then you got to get yourself over to that voting booth and make the magic happen. And speaking of magic, I am here today with one of our city council candidates, Sam Rose. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Debbie. Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Sam, you ran for council 4 years ago, or is it 2 years ago?
2 years ago, yeah.
Oh my gosh, time is like flying by. So I was so happy to see you running again. But for maybe some of the people who aren't familiar with you, could you just kind of give us a little who is Sam Rose?
Oh, absolutely. So I ran 2 years ago. That really felt like a good introduction to people. So here's my reintroduction. Still a volunteer firefighter, currently an EMT as well. Do response advocacy work for victims of sexual assault and domestic violence, on the Planning and Zoning Commission, on the 9th Judicial District Performance Commission. Still work for the Public Health Department for Pickens County, and just heavily involved in all civic engagements in the city, honestly.
I feel like a few of those started after you ran 2 years ago. You're on the P&Z right now, is
Yes.
that correct?
Yeah.
As well, yeah. So good for you. After you didn't get elected, that didn't stop you. You really wanted to be engaged with local politics.
Yeah, I felt like I took the critiques from 2 years ago, was lack of experience, and tried to become as knowledgeable and, make that learning curve less steep if I were to be elected. So planning and zoning, a lot of people call it city council light. I've learned a ton from it, and from it I've been able to, take a deep dive into the land use code and the Aspen area community plan, and meet a lot of really wonderful people and just understand how the city operates.
Well, I hope you can help all of us with that too someday. But bigger picture, Sam, tell me what your vision is for being on city council.
So my vision for being on city council, it comes from my priorities for this community, and that's improving the quality of life here. Pretty atypical for a lot of candidates, but my priorities of helping to fix the entrance to Aspen, working on affordable housing and childcare, working on the empty spaces installed projects in town, aka the permitting process, and protecting our natural environment. I just hope to take steps in the right direction that people can see the positive impact that local government can have on their lives, especially with all the things that have gone on in the last couple of years that I think have really not ended up as well as they could have.
Okay, so tell me one positive thing that our current council has been doing.
As far as positives go, they've been doing a great job as far as protecting our natural environment. Obviously, recency bias here, but being at the most recent city council meeting, they really just re-upped our code on residential energy use and emissions, and those are taking positive steps in the right direction for our resort community and trying to maintain our way of life here, because it relies on the natural environment above all else.
Yeah, and do you think there's any missteps that have been happening?
Yeah, the missteps that have been happening, usually it's not intent as much as it is process. And with that, it's, and it's a long process and there's a lot more story to it, but it's like getting rid of a child care provider without having a replacement at hand. And, I talked to a lot of families that were left hanging for the 7 months that provider was missing. The living lab was probably the most classic example of something that most people agree on. I know it was an experiment and the intent was there, but it was rolled out 6 weeks later than intended, so it was supposed to be rolled out when it was more quiet. Instead, it was rolled out July 4th. All the local businesses were disturbed by it, the lack of parking. I was personally in physical therapy, luckily for an upper body injury, and there's so many people coming in that had to walk blocks on crutches to get into that sort of thing. So it's really a lot of the one-size-fits-all mentality of city council there's way more nuance to it, and we need to provide that nuance to make sure that we have better solutions for a different variety of people.
Correct. Well, you named off some priorities, but if you got elected, name those top 3 for me again.
So the entrance to Aspen, I just
Okay.
think that, that's a generational issue that we're coming into that's going to affect us for the next 50 to 75 years. And my position on it is just having the best possible solutions presented and facilitating the best outcome. Because right now, there's a lot of things that would happen if this current proposal was done that are currently flawed. So I'd like to fix those flaws if this is to be voted on, or explore different opportunities that might make more sense. My overall idea behind that is to do no harm or do the least amount of harm. And right now I feel like there's just a lot of things that need to be worked out rather than like going down a road that leads to these flaws that will be potentially devastating to Aspen for, decades.
Do you have ideas outside of fixing the bridge or the preferred alternative that you'd like to bring forward?
Yeah, I just want to point out though that there's no perfect solution, and each has it really is the ultimate pros and cons list. But like I will say, the current proposal has issues with the new stoplight on 7th and Main. No idea where the new bus stop is going to be because the one on 8th and Hallam right now is the current busiest. The division of that like neighborhood that's in between, potentially having it be just like a highway on both sides. We want to ask ourselves, do we want to go into that open space or not? And yeah, the idling cars coming back into the city potentially from 7th and Main. The other 2 solutions that I've looked into in great detail, just as far as just looking into more, would be turning our current bridge into a 3-lane bridge, which would once again comes with like opening the record decision, another environmental impact study, and potentially some short-term pain to actually get that accomplished. And the other one that I've taken a deep dive into is called the split shot, which would be a 2-lane highway into town over Merle, one way, and then the old configuration being 2 lanes out of town, and sort of creates this like interesting loop formation. And that has its flaws as well as far as like capacity of allowing that many cars in at once. So it's more about getting to the bottom of it, honestly, rather than...
So if you have a 4-year term here, what would be the hope at the end of the 4 years when it came to this entrance to Aspen conversation?
I would hope we'd have a solution, especially in the next 4 years, because I think like time is of the essence when it comes to this. That's why we're discussing it now. And a lot of the solutions being brought forward come from a record of decision that came from like the 1990s. So it's something that needs to be explored in depth. And this is something that we'll probably make a decision on in the next 2 years, let alone the next 4.
Yeah. A lot of the votes for the entrance over the years have really not been that conclusive. So you end up with like 49, 51%. If the council was bold enough to make a decision and say this is the way we're going to go, you're going to have alienated potentially half of the residents. What will you be doing as a council member to try to bring everybody together on this solution and not split our community more than it is?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe it comes down to collaboration and being able to explain the decision-making process. So for me, it would be, once again, doing the least amount of harm, because I don't believe there is such thing as do no harm when it comes to this situation. And it's just examples of if it does go through Merle open space, then making it the least impactful on that. If it does end up with like traffic configuration with 7th and Main, like how can we work around that so traffic can keep going forward and we don't have cars idling in downtown? So it's sort of, figuring out what the community like not just wants, but just like how to, mitigate against these consequences of whatever solution we do come to. And I think it's like would be my job as a city council person to it's not about me. I live at Hunter Creek. I don't live close to the bridge. Like it's different for different people depending on the neighborhoods you live in. So I think it's like, being empathetic towards all situations and trying to come to that conclusion that does the least amount of harm.
Right. What are you going to do to ensure adequate transparency and communication between the city, the businesses, and the residents?
I would just make sure that there's like more more outreach done in a way that's easy to see, honestly. When I think about like outreach that the city has done, a lot of time it's you come to me, and I'd like the city to go to more of the stakeholders when it comes to outreach, because a lot of people don't necessarily see or have time to do that.
Right.
And then just trying to develop a system of transparency where people know where to look, at least to find this information.
Right. It's true, because I think the city does do a pretty good job of putting together opportunities for people to come and see things, but it always seems like at that very last minute, people don't feel that they were heard, or they feel like there was just a checkbox and the city's going in the way that they're going to go. And it's creating some of those outreaches are creating some ill will. Mm-hmm. Is there any way to fix that?
Yeah, well, I think this current council is going to be just different regardless, as far as, because Bill Guth or I, or maybe both of us, will be elected, and from that will become a very different council without Rachel Richards, who's done an incredible job. But with that will bring new opportunity for relations with a community that hasn't necessarily been heard all the time. And I'm not from that development real estate world or that small business world, but I like to do outreach to what I would call the local experts and stakeholders, and try to include them in the conversation, and at least explain where I'm coming from, how can I feel they're heard, and at least explain to them why we came to a conclusion that we did. So,
do you feel like we only just hear from the same voices? And if we do, how do we get our younger generation to be more involved and enthusiastic about kind of creating their own community for their future?
Yeah, to me it's interesting. I think a lot of that is the lack of belief that they're going to be able to stay here. So why do they care what happens as far as these generational issues? But ultimately I talk about the larger ecosystem that we live in this community, where it should be more symbiotic relationships, where what's good for you is good for me, and making the younger community understand that there's going to be opportunity for them, and how we can get them involved and increase that quality of life for them.
Yeah. What changes, if any, do you think need to be made to our land use code?
It should probably be simplified in some ways more than anything else. The complex nature of it make it so that only the big brands can come to our community, and it makes it impossible for local businesses. And, it's the unintended consequences that we've experienced of being so ironclad. But if we simplify the land use code, or at least make it easier to comprehend without it costing so much money in the permitting process and take so much time to go through that process, you would see a lot more local business be able to survive here.
Well, that would be wonderful. So let's get on that. Mm-hmm. As City Council, what would you do to enhance affordable housing options in Aspen?
So as far as affordable housing options go, I'd like to talk about maintaining what we currently have. I talk about on my platform on my website that it's unfortunate the city didn't buy the Centennial Housing Complex when it was for sale for close to $10 million, and it sold for somewhere in the $50 million range. And now the rents are being raised there, and eventually the deed restrictions are going to sunset. Beyond that, I look for, and I don't think I'm alone in this, but for development neutral housing options where there's existing infrastructure that could be used. And then one of the biggest things that I've talked to recently as far as expanding our affordable housing is, people always talk about development like it's a dirty word, and it can be, but there's such a thing as smart development when it is for our affordable housing stock. And a lot of that will be done in the most responsible way if we're able to, work with our development community where they get something, but we get more affordable housing from it as well. There's a permit going in to change what's happening where Replay Sports is in the SCI zone. In exchange for that, it's supposed to increase our affordable housing by turning 440 Park into affordable housing and the Boomerang into affordable housing. And that's one of those things where we can't, be taken advantage of by the development community, but we can use that as an opportunity to leverage into getting more affordable housing into existing infrastructure.
Right. Do you have any strategies you're going to implement to make that happen?
It's just fighting for the people and understanding what our leverage is and not getting taken advantage of by the development community, but be able to work with them. We should have more symbiotic relationships. And, you know, time and time again, you look at like things like Lift 1A, where we feel like as citizens and as people, we've gotten burned by the development community. So we really just need to be like ironclad in our intentions. And I've seen that on P&Z where we, you know, there are mechanisms we can use to make sure that those affordable housing projects get done before they get to do what their free market projects. And you know, we can avoid giving them a resident of occupancy certificate until we get what we want out of that. So
yeah, the environment, you care about it.
The environment becomes comes before all else, honestly.
Yeah.
It's the reason why we're here, and it's the reason why this place is so incredible. So
do you have some strategies and tactics that like to bring that to the forefront? I know the city's pretty progressive in a lot of their programs. Is there one that in particular you like or would like to see sort of, I don't know, kind of go to the forefront?
I think it's just preparing for the future with me, because what the city has done, and that's what I compliment them on, is they are taking steps in the right direction. I think it comes into play with like the entrance to Aspen and affordable housing. It's just like, you know, making our residential buildings more environmentally friendly, planning more towards an electric car future. You know, getting away from any like fossil fuels, like powering like any energy uses in town. So just like doing those sort of things. And then actually the biggest one to me is just being an example that we other communities can follow. I think it's like Aspen has such a special place in the world, and that we can be stewards of the environment, and we are.
Yeah.
We should keep going in that direction so that other communities, because we can't do this alone. So it's great that we're doing what we're doing, but I think we should be able to have like a blueprint and set an example for other communities to, you know, be as environmentally friendly as possible.
Yeah. You know, when we talk about the environment, the first thing that always pops into a lot of people's head is the airport. And while I know City Council, that's not your job, the airport, but how do you work with your stakeholders to kind of get our perspective from the city with the county and with the development that's going on out at the airport?
That's an interesting one just because, it's like a little out of the city's purview, but I mean, the city is so narrow as far as just like the land we occupy, but we're such an epicenter for all the economic and like activity going on in the valley. So as far as that goes, it's just putting our 2 cents in as far as working with the Board of County Commissioners and other stakeholders to make sure we get the desired result from that.
Yeah.
Because the airport is obviously like very valuable to like the economy here, but at the same time, it's always good that we're exploring like what makes the most sense for us.
Yeah. How are you going to ensure that Aspen remains an attractive place to visit and to live?
I think it's about the interconnectedness that like every thing I talked about. It's about trying to make it more public transportation friendly. I think it's about like having enough affordable housing so that we have a workforce that, meets the desires of our visitors. I think it's about like promoting sectors of our economy that like are in need right now. I think it's about I'm trying to think, making sure that we're like environmentally friendly enough. It's about working with the ski company to make sure that that's still like all the desires there. It's just moving forward with all the stuff that we're working on.
Yeah, it's a lot. Balance is this word that gets thrown around a lot, and I always feel like we're on one side of the pendulum or the other, and we're not really finding that balance. Do you have any ideas of how we do balance what business needs, what residents needs, what our arts and cultural community needs, the tourists? There's like a lot of user groups inside the city, and how do we balance all of their needs?
That's a great question. I would say it's just about That's a tough one as
Yeah,
far as just like
it's
finding the balance. It's more just like,
it's like all or nothing, I feel like a lot of times, and it's and I struggle with that at the chamber. Like, how do we find this rhythm, this harmony that we're looking for as a community, where everything doesn't have to be like all or nothing? And as leaders, I feel like our council and our mayor could lead us through sort of balanced approach on how we're going to behave, how we're going to prioritize as a community.
Yeah, honestly, it goes back to like working with all the stakeholders,
Yeah.
and a lot of times that means working with like the development community, with the local businesses, and trying to like understand what their needs are and how that can help the locals and help them. It's really just like searching for more symbiotic relationships.
Right.
And that
I always say there's like rolling alliances in our community.
Yeah.
So sometimes the city and the chamber are working together, and sometimes we're at odds, and sometimes the businesses are at odds, and it's like you can't really burn a bridge in this town, because more likely than not, you're going to have to be working with somebody in another capacity a little bit farther down the line. So I always try to be very careful about not burning the bridges as we, as we go over them. What's your sort of management style that you would like to see on council?
It's always about being respectful and being collaborative, and like understanding that we're working towards like a common goal and what's best for this community, that everyone's intentions are good even if their policy is different. And once again, it goes back to the same thing I said. It's finding those more symbiotic relationships. We have too much of an us versus them mentality these days. We live in a very politically polarizing culture, but there definitely are a lot of opportunities, like we discussed, to make it so positive steps happen for you and for me and for this whole community.
Right. I feel like the rising tide does lift all the boats. So if we're all working together for the vision of what we want Aspen to be, I do think we can hitch to that wagon a little bit.
Yeah.
Sam, do you have your website up, and like people are watching this today and they're like, gosh, Sam has really come along in the last couple years.
Yeah.
You know a lot of the issues. You've been participatory over the last couple years. So if people wanted to learn more about you, where would they go?
samroseforaspen.com.
samroseforaspen.com.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are you out there knocking on doors right now? Or
Yeah.
like, what's your strategy to get out?
I'll be knocking on doors, taking time off from work to knock on doors all of the
Yeah.
next 2 weeks. I got my flyers printed. I'll be sending some people postcards.
All right. So answer the doors when you hear the doorbell rings.
It's easy to talk to people and understand. I mean, I've been doing a lot of outreach this month as far as like trying to find as many stakeholders, reaching to people on boards and commissions, current council members, former council members, and mayors. It's tough to understand. There's a lot of contradictory nature out there, but honestly, like I think if we take a very logistical and methodological approach, then we'll take steps in the right direction. So,
well, I'm wishing you the best of luck. And before we leave today, I just want to give you the opportunity, your little elevator speech here. Sam, why are we voting for you for City Council?
I would love your vote and be honored for it because I've been taking steps in the right direction as far as like learning the land use code, the Aspen Area Community Plan, having support from so many different communities, whether it be people in Free Market or ABSHA, the local business community, Babs at the Big Rap, the fire emergency community, the medical community. I just feel like I'm a very good representative for the people. I listen to all sides. I understand the issues, and I find pragmatic and sensible approaches that will help get them done. So it would be a net positive, I think, for this community to elect me.
Well, I'm wishing you the best of luck, Sam, over the next couple months. There's lots of Squirm Nights ahead of you and election forums and really tons of great ways to get your platform out. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for sticking with us these last 30 minutes as we talk about local elections. So incredibly important in our community. I think this community thrives on gathering together, looking at tough problems, figuring them out, shaking hands, and then going over to the dog park and all playing together with our dogs. So I really commend everybody who's taking this time to run for elected positions. It's no easy feat. So thank you. Thank you all for watching us on this edition of Aspen Affairs, brought to you by the Aspen Chamber Resort Association. Again, I'm Debbie Braun with the Chamber, and thank you so much. Have a great day.